Welcome to another episode of Smash JT. I recently purchased Trials of Mana on the Nintendo Switch and I'm absolutely loving it. The game is, for all intents and purposes, exactly what I wanted out of a all-encompassing remake of a game. Something that is not entirely new to Square Enix. As you can see behind me, I have a slew of different games that Square Enix has at one point or another remastered. In this video, I want to talk about how Trials of Mana kind of makes me feel like it was a test run for a Chrono Trigger remake. Now, before you guys get your panties in a bunch, I know a lot of people out there do not want a Chrono Trigger remake. They like it just how it was on the Super Nintendo. One of the all-time greatest games in the history of video games in my hand right here. Chrono Trigger, I mean, if you haven't played it yet, what are you doing with your life? Even if you don't like JRPGs, it does something a lot more. The storyline is far more invested than most JRPGs, and it's easier to get into, and the action in the battles is just, it's something magical about it. But this video isn't going to focus on what Chrono Trigger is, because most likely you clicked on it because you like Chrono Trigger and you're interested in my theory as to why I feel this way. Let me indulge you on a couple of things I've been rolling around in my brain lately. The original Secret of Mana, one of my favorite games ever created on the Super Nintendo, had a remake on the PlayStation 4 a couple years ago, and initially I wasn't the biggest fan of it, but as time went on, I was like, you know what? It's not terrible, it's good, but it's not what I wanted the Secret of Mana remake to be. Then recently, or more recently, they had the Collection of Mana that just re-released the original Final Fantasy Adventure, Secret of Mana, and Secret of Mana 2 on the Super Nintendo Seiken Densetsu, which never came to the United States, but eventually it did when it got fully translated and put into the Collection of Mana, eventually becoming the full-on remake of Trials of Mana, which is the direct sequel, if you will, to Secret of Mana being a remade. This is exactly what I would want a remake to be. Not this. This. They got it right the second time. The voice acting is a lot better. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better. The 3D graphics are a lot better. Not perfect, but a lot better. The gameplay, the action, the way the fighting works. Trials of Mana is far superior as a remake to the Secret of Mana remake, or Secret of Mana. I don't even know what they want to officially call this. It's just upgraded gameplay, 3D graphics, remastered version of Secret of Mana. They don't call it a remake, they call it a remaster. Whatever. Not going to try to divide people with what the intricacies of what they call these are. I'm just saying how Square Enix has gone about these has progressively gotten better and better. All the way to when you look at the DS with the Final Fantasy series, Final Fantasy 3 and Final Fantasy 4 coming fully remade in 3D on the Nintendo DS. And then we find ourselves recently with the Final Fantasy 7 Remake, which completely revolutionized the graphics and gameplay of the original Final Fantasy 7. Most of the people that enjoyed the original Final Fantasy 7 are enjoying the remake. The people that don't like Final Fantasy 7 Remake, I'm finding, haven't played the original. Now, that's not like a direct correlation or a line that's drawn. I'm just saying the overwhelming majority, the people who have played the original, have more nostalgia for it, and they enjoy what Square Enix did, bringing it to the new era. Myself included. Is it perfect? No, but man, it's a great game, especially for someone who grew up loving Final Fantasy 7. Anyways, getting back to the main point, main argument, if you will, for this video, why I feel like Chrono Trigger is very close to being the next game Square Enix is going to remake. After playing Trials of Mana, I'm about 7 hours into it, maybe 8, I can't remember exactly. And I've paused it just like I did with Final Fantasy VII while I'm making dinner and stuff. Just listening to the music, it's just so freaking good. Square Enix, it's way beyond the scope of what most games do. Regardless of that though, Trials of Mana on the Nintendo Switch, the graphics, the main character especially, has the hairstyle of Chrono, which got me thinking, okay, they did the graphics like this, the hair bounces around, it kind of looks a little bit like Chrono from Chrono Trigger. And then I get into the action, the gameplay of it, and I'm like, you know what? The way they did the worlds, the way they rendered everything, the way the action and the fighting works, and the way the voice acting, it's not too far-fetched to say that Chrono Trigger could be remastered, or, excuse me, remade in the vein of what Trials of Mana is. It could be basically a test run to see if they're able to transfer a 2D action JRPG into a 3D game and make it still work and make it still feel fun, which they've been doing for years now. Not saying it's the first time. But this one feels like the most fully fleshed out version of it. Like Square Enix themselves have learned a tremendous amount of what works and what doesn't when transferring a game from 2D to 3D. And at this point in time, it's not too much of a stretch to say Square Enix could take the 2D of Chrono Trigger and fully remake it in 3D without the limitations of storage space or anything like that. I mean, we saw how big Final Fantasy VII Remake's file is, so I'm not worried about any of that. And as far as the legacy Chrono Trigger has left on people, I feel like it would have equal amount of hype behind it that the Final Fantasy VII Remake did. Not right off the bat, though. I think if people look back, Final Fantasy VII was always looked at as one of the best Final Fantasy VII games. So regardless of what you feel about it, the overwhelming majority of people always point to Final Fantasy VII as one of the best ones. When you take a step back and look at gamers in general, top 10 lists of video games of all time, Chrono Trigger is often on that top 10. Sometimes in the top 5, and oftentimes I've seen it as the #1 game of all time. So yes, Chrono Trigger has a legacy behind it. People absolutely love the game, but it's kind of fallen out of memory in the recent times. Not too many people, especially kids these days, if you will, talk about Chrono Trigger. Yeah, sure, it's been re-released countless times on Steam, on PlayStation 1. Hell, there was a sequel on PlayStation 1 called Chrono Cross. A good game, it just didn't hold my attention like the original Chrono Trigger did. And that's kind of my point here. People who love Chrono Trigger haven't really thought about it for a while. So many games have come out since between then and now that Chrono Trigger is just like a memory of, oh yeah, it was a good game. It was a really awesome time when I was a kid. I loved that game. But nobody's really talking about it in the modern sense. So I would look for Square Enix to start putting some feelers out there in the next 6 to 8 months to test the waters to see if people were interested in this remake. It's going to be a gigantic undertaking. The original Chrono Trigger game on the Super Nintendo was massive. So to remake all of that in 3D is a lot to ask, but it's definitely possible. And what proves that to me is Trials of Mana. Before Trials of Mana, I didn't think they'd be able to do it. I didn't think the scope of the game was small enough. I felt like it was way too big for them to ever possibly try to render the entire thing in 3D and make sense of it and still make money at the end of the day out of it. But after playing Trials of Mana, maybe it's not as hard as I first thought. This is something that, after playing Final Fantasy VII Remake as well, that clearly Square Enix has shown the ability to remake these games and still make them fun and bring them to the new age of gamers, where people may not have ever played the original and play this one and still enjoy it for what it is. I'm finding a lot of people out there are doing that, myself included, because yes, Final Fantasy VII was one of my favorite games ever and the remake was great. Trials of Mana, I never actually got around to playing the original one. I never did. I played like 20-30 minutes of it, but then got distracted with life and never got back to it, and always wanted to. I just never had the chance to. And then Trials of Mana came out and you're like, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna get this game, I'm gonna play through it, and I'm gonna see if I truly enjoy it or not. And I do. I love it. It's the Secret of Mana remake that I always wanted and never got. That's what Trials of Mana is to me. And looking at what they did with it, it's not too far-fetched to say Chrono Trigger is potentially the next gigantic remake that Square Enix goes ahead and does. Maybe I'm crazy, and I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that don't want Chrono Trigger remade, that are perfectly fine with it on the Super Nintendo, and it doesn't need any more done to it, because sometimes, you know, especially when it comes to like TV and movies, we don't want remakes. The original's perfectly fine. Hollywood's run out of ideas. Why we keep remaking these same movies? It's kind of the same with what video games have become, if you can't tell. But at the same time, they do add something to the conversation. They make something different and make you excited about nostalgia. And in this case, I am thrilled about the idea, about the potential that Chrono Trigger could be the next gigantic remake that Square Enix moves forward with. Is there any kind of specific direct evidence that I have that this is going to happen? No, there's no evidence that I have that directly correlates from Secret of Mana to Trials of Mana to Chrono Trigger. I'm just going by the history of what Square Enix has done and what makes logical sense from a financial and business standpoint. And I'm looking at this like, if Square Enix were to announce at E3, which was canceled this year, but if they were to have been planning to announce that, it would have rocked the world. Could you imagine if they showed a trailer of the original Chrono Trigger remade fully in 3D that was kind of a graphics quasi between the both of Final Fantasy VII Remake and Trials of Mana? If they made it, mashed it together, and made Chrono Trigger look cartoony but also serious at the same time, it gets me very excited to think about the potential. And maybe Square was planning on rolling that out to get the feelers out there to see how people react to it. Maybe not a direct trailer, maybe just putting out some tweets to see what people thought about it. My feeling on this is just a matter of time. When it comes to gaming in general, if you wait long enough, anything you can think of typically eventually happens. And that's kind of what I feel like with Chrono Trigger. That this game, it's just a matter of time. Pun intended, I guess. But honestly, I'd be interested to hear what you guys have to say about this theory. If you're with me that Chrono Trigger is the next big game to be remastered by Square Enix, or if you think I'm completely out of my mind, or you don't want Chrono Trigger, or you think that's something that nobody's asking for, and you'd prefer, I don't know, a new game, someone to make a sequel to Chrono Cross, or even dig into their past games like Parasite Eve. I know a lot of people have been talking about those as well. Tons of different directions that Square could go with how fantastic their remakes have been. They've been selling like hotcakes, so I don't see any reason for them to stop doing it. Digging into their back catalog of amazing games they've made before, it just gets me very excited. Anyways, I'm going to stop rambling. I've been talking for way too long here. I'm just very excited about the potential of Chrono Trigger coming as a full-on remake. But for now, I'm going to go back to playing some more Trials of Mana. Maybe I'll make a video talking about my thoughts on it completely. I think I kind of gave a sense of it here. But yeah, Trials of Mana is a lot of fun. Having a blast with it. And I'll probably talk more about that after I'm done with the game. Anyways, I'm going to leave it right there. Thanks so much for watching. And as always, you stay smashing.